want to introduce the next panel that we have. Really exciting one. It's a whole team from Microsoft who's going to talk about some lessons learned and hopefully give us some cool examples. And even more exciting is that this panel is going to be moderated by the fantastic and charming and amusing and intelligent Justin Fox, who I've known for quite a long time. And he's a columnist at Bloomberg. He writes about business and economics for Bloomberg Opinion and Bloomberg Business Week. He was also previously editorial director of the Harvard Business Review and has worked at Time, Fortune, and the Birmingham, Alabama News. He is the author of The Myth of the Rational Market, A History of Risk, Reward, and Delusion on Wall Street. So I urge you to go pick that up on Amazon. And I'm so grateful he is here. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Melissa. I am actually in an office, Bloomberg's office in New York. But obviously, a lot of the rest of you aren't. And for much of the world, white collar workers have not been in the office for the last 18 months in a lot of places. And that meant all interaction, collaboration had to switch to digital. And lots of workers around the world started spending their days doing exactly what we're doing now, except probably more adept at getting their microphones to work. Now, obviously, the sort of the Kleenex of this phenomenon is Zoom, and we're on Zoom now, but for lots of organizations, large and small, it wasn't Zoom they were using, it was Microsoft Teams. And we have 3 stars from the Teams team here, Freada, Zysberg, Aamer, Kaleem, and Bill Spencer, to tell us what they and some of their customers have learned over the past year and a half. They'll each give a brief presentation. You can ask questions at any point by clicking on the Q&A thing, and we'll see them, but not everybody else won't. And then, I'll try to ask as many of those as possible when the presentations are done. We're going to start with Freada, who's a senior program manager for Teams here in New York, a job she's held for the past 3 years plus and has had a bunch of other roles at the company before that. She's going to give an overview of Microsoft's collaboration strategy and the Teams engineering organization. So Freada, let's go.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to make a Zoom joke too, because I'm not really used to presenting, but let's see. Hopefully this works. Awesome. Okay, so
yeah, looks good.
Awesome. I thought we'd just start a bit with how did we even get here? Why Teams? Why did we decide to make this investment and go in the strategic direction when we talk about enterprise collaboration? And I think I was listening in on the session beforehand, and there's no question that we saw in the market that the way in which people were interacting, coming together, ideating, innovating was changing. Previously, there were these point-in-time interactions. They weren't persistent. It was unstructured sort of group work that was happening, which is absolutely something that everybody's used to doing, but there was a need for something more, something different, something more persistent, more structured. And so that's really how Teams was born. I'm sure Bill and Aamer will share a bit more here, because I know we've all been involved at various points in the very beginning stages of the Teams journey. And I'll highlight here too, that the way in which we started building Teams and ideating on the technology was significantly different than maybe how we had approached product development in the past. And Bill, Aamer, and I actually work within our Teams product group, but within a subset of engineering that works directly with our customers. And we spent, pre-pandemic, a bunch of time sort of traveling the world, working with customers of all sizes and industries, and understanding what is it that people are doing today? How are your people working? What are the things that they want? And using that voice of customer to drive our investments. And it was just a small pivot, but a really significant pivot in how we approached the product development. Pre-pandemic, we were going around the world, as I mentioned, and we were spending time listening to voice of customer for feedback and working very closely with these customers on their deployment and adoption approach. What are the user stories, right? maybe not so much the technology that the users need, but the behavior that these end users want to be able to drive. What are the things that they do during the day? How can we identify these personas, build out these user stories, and help you build a deployment and adoption approach to make you successful? And there was a really big hum sort of across the enterprise when it came to teams. And I included here on our slides what our adoption numbers look like. So when we started in 2016, and this sort of mediocre growth that we saw happening even before the pandemic, but you can see the hockey stick. Right before we went into lockdown, we had some, tremendous growth on Teams. It was actually the fastest growing business technology at Microsoft, which will just give you a little inkling into how successful it was. And then obviously, when lockdown came, I think we had this incredible foundation, especially across the enterprise, when it came to leveraging Teams for collaboration needs. Right, bringing people together. I always say content, context with my contacts to be able to innovate. And so like all this groundwork was really laid for us. And, we had a lot of the sort of product truth and technology that we needed to help our customers be successful, to be able to scale very quickly. That good foundation was there. And you'll hear from Aamer right after me in terms of like what we did to help enable our customers really rapidly during the pandemic. But the engineering group in Microsoft as a whole had been spending our time pre-pandemic really laying the foundation. We didn't really know, obviously we had no inkling of what was to come, but it was really an incredible byproduct of the work and our differentiated approach before lockdown. So I wanted to just sort of walk you through here what this growth looked like, how this new way of working, bringing people together, with their applications and chat and structure across any modality, right? So whether I choose to engage from a mobile device or I choose to engage from my desktop, whether I'm remote, traveling, or I was in the office, really making sure that everybody had a first-class experience was just paramount. And you can see here that represented in the growth. We've actually just come out with some of our updated active usage numbers and some statistics. And I thought I'd just show you kind of the sheer size of what the Teams footprint looks like across the enterprise. So, at this time, we have over 250 million monthly active users. From a Fortune 100 perspective or 1,000 perspective, I think it's 99% of the Fortune 1,000 are actually leveraging Teams as a primary source of collaboration. And it spans much more than just this meeting experience that we're in now. It's about synchronous and asynchronous collaboration and giving people the flexibility and fluidity to move seamlessly between the work they do as an individual and the work that they do as a group, and then that structured work as a group. And so it's really just, incredible growth that we've seen and this differentiated approach that I think has changed the way in which the enterprise is collaborating. I was just going to say, I'll turn it back maybe to introduce my colleague to talk a bit about what happened once we went into lockdown and what did that look like? What were those first couple of days, weeks, and months? Because it was really incredible. So Justin, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. So, and once again, someone just thought to ask a question of what Freada was talking about. If the second you have a question, just go ahead and ask it, and then we can talk about them later. So next up is Aamer Kaleem, who's a principal PM manager with Teams Engineering, I think in Microsoft's home base in Redmond. And he's a veteran of several other companies as well as the Pakistan Air Force. And he's going to talk about what happened after the pandemic hit. Aamer.
Thank you again, Justin, and special thanks to Melissa and Stern School of Business. What an opportunity. It's a personal honor. So much have changed since last March, right? Today, we are actually essentially in a hybrid work era. But back in that time, when the start of the pandemic, the challenge for the businesses was to enable their users to work from home, simply just to work from home. What you see on the screen is a 40,000 feet view of those first 2 months. And I'm going to tell you as much as I can in a very quick way and summarized way that, hey, what happened there? So enterprise leaders wanted to get in touch with their employees and just stay in touch. They just wanted to communicate their company's COVID-19 response through like virtual town halls. Many employees were getting furloughed, and so there was a need to stay engaged with them to tell them that what's happening. Operationally, it was all about onboarding users to Teams. So as you can imagine, every organization, business, enterprise on the planet wanted us to get on, online right away, sort of a thing. We in Microsoft had gone remote ourselves, and amazingly, there was just before pandemic, we had seen a really amazing adoption, and people who were in our shoes, they have seen very little disruption of work per se, thanks to Teams and technologies like that. So first order of the business was what users need to work from home effectively. That was what it is. And our leadership asked us to come up with a reprioritized list of features and capabilities so that we can fast track them. We were very lucky that the strategy, which we were executing since beginning of 2017, was really set well. It's a matter of just reprioritizing that what features needs to be brought in front, fast track, so that people can work from home. So for next 4 to 6 weeks, team went to work on the identified features. I'm going to spare you from what it is, but I'll just remind you, that video grid you see on the screen today, raise your hand, blur your background, increase the size of the meeting, those, sort of things which we basically started to work and started to deliver right away. Ascana, we were flying the plane by being being in air. In parallel, there was a continuous connections with the customers to help them understand the execution plan for work from home. Other important area there was to ensure that the capacity to onboard enormous number of users was there. We in Teams engineers were fully supported by every group and team within Microsoft to make this a reality. Special thanks to our Azure partners, Azure team, because as you know, probably the team itself runs on Azure Cloud. We always maintained, even before pandemic, access capacity. That headroom which we had before was very quickly going away. And COVID-19 requirements were to scramble and increase that capacity many fold. So that's what you see that, in the first few weeks, we basically went to 6x, and then, a couple of weeks later, 10x right away. The other focus area was to make sure that there was an access capacity on PSTN access as well for the audio conferencing, because many people now were on all-day conference calls, coordinating their plans and stuff like that. So special thanks to our partners who worked in locksteps with us in every major region. Huge kudos to them to make sure that there was a capacity available for the dial-in access. People within Microsoft became so selfless, and it was so crazy things happening that they started to, in my humble opinion, ignore their own well-being. And our leadership very quickly identified that, and they started to mandate people to disconnect. I'm talking about week 2 onwards, so week 3 and week 4. People are not, getting enough sleep, and that's what we basically wanted, people to go back and sleep. We are sort of, in some cases actually begging our teams to, hey, you need to go and take the rest. There are people, we got it. We're going to do this. Just imagine onboarding the whole education system, countries, or in a short amount of time. I mean, 400,000 to 600,000 user onboarding of various educational institutions in Eastern Europe or in Middle East was not unheard of. We actually had done that areas or countries where there was no compute, capacity on ground to make sure that the experience was okay. We actually flew in equipment, and we were sitting on the tarmac and working with the local authorities and government to get the clearance done so that we can get this thing up and running. Same thing, you probably all experienced that. We all went through that when retailers had to rush through to make sure that they stock up on the necessary items, and that required communications, a single communication pane of glass from corporate headquarters to halls. And that's what almost every major retailer did using Teams, basically. So it was all about to keep their operations running up and running. One example, which is a little bit, I think is a really cool and near and dear to my heart, is actually come from a safety standpoint. You might have heard a name of a company, the Mosaic company. They're one of the mining companies, very large company in the world in many countries. They had, the issue at hand for them was that with all this lockdown, safety at their mining and construction sites. All the subject matter experts who have gone now, they were all remote. So how to make sure those inspections were happening and things are, safe. They leverage technology, or one of our partners, Southworks, to build drone video feeds inside team for remote subject matter experts to make those critical decisions to avoid any kind of emergencies or safety issues. Other things you might have heard from us and in other places, NFL, the industry shows, the large events, consumer electronic show, that happening on team. So there was a very common thing which we heard, and we are so grateful, we are so humbled that our customers, our partners, the common thing which we heard was that, hey, if it was not for the teams, we would not be able to keep our lights on. And so that basically is a very high level sort of a quick summary recap of what you probably heard from Satya and Nadella of the first 2 months. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Justin at this point.
Thanks, Aamer. So next up is Bill Spencer, who's Senior Director for Customer Engineering for Teams. And I feel don't know if I should bring this up, but it's right on his LinkedIn bio that he joined Microsoft in 1990, which is the year that the company rolled out Windows 3.0, which sort of ushered in the modern age of business computing, and also ensured Microsoft's central role in it. But that's not what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about some of the ways the Teams team helped its customers in the public sector, who I imagine in some places probably struggled with this change a lot more than private sector organizations did. So Bill, and before I remember, you can ask questions at any time, and we'll ask them and talk about them when Bill is done.
Thank you, Justin. And Freada, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slides a couple. Well, yes, I really appreciate that intro, Justin. And I am going to take a bit of a longer view on some of my comments as well. But I want to start by thanking those who are in the process of getting their MBA or who've recently completed their MBA, and just to congratulate them for taking that step, because I know it involves personal sacrifice, but getting an MBA was life-changing for me. It's the most efficient way to gain the perspective of a senior executive across all the necessary business functions. And Freada and Aamer have gotten there as well over more years, but I was fortunate enough to get an accelerated process by getting my MBA. Second, I want to thank Melissa Schilling, Lisa Chen, you, Justin, and everyone at Stern who organized this conference on innovation. And I recommend to every MBA to make innovation the guiding principle of their career. I have, and I've always been looking for the next big thing to work on and to become an expert in it. Because ironically, you can become an expert faster on the next big thing than going back and working on something that's been around for a long period of time. So always look for that next big thing. And finally, I encourage anyone looking for their next opportunity to look hard at Microsoft, and no matter where they work, to look hard at Microsoft Teams, because it is a great way to get work done faster. But over my career, I've been fortunate to contribute to the creation of many Microsoft products and services, including Microsoft Outlook, Edge, Bing. And every workday, over 1 billion people worldwide get something done using a product to which I've personally contributed. Without an MBA, that wouldn't have been an opportunity. And without focusing on innovation, I'd still be working on the Outlook team. So that's my advice, is to always look for that next big thing. The experience on Microsoft Teams has been the most gratifying because we were doing, as Freada said, very well before the COVID outbreak and the lockdown. We increased 50% in the 2 months or 3 months before anyone was even talking about COVID, to the fastest growing product at Microsoft history. But with the outbreak and the lockdown, hundreds of millions of customers use Teams to continue working, to continue schooling, in many cases to save their sanity by continuing to collaborate remotely with the communities that they've built at work and in other settings. But most importantly, to save lives. So for example, every pharmaceutical company that created a COVID-19 vaccine relied on Microsoft Teams to speed those vaccines to market. So I believe we, materially contributed to the fast pace of that innovation. And we know that because we had to sign these critical infrastructure agreements that were part of the COVID executive order. The National Guard distributing the vaccines in the United States, they relied on Microsoft Teams to do that. So for those of you who've been vaccinated, and I encourage all of you to be vaccinated, that, that infrastructure initially, at least with the big distribution centers, were all through Microsoft Teams. And as Freada and Aamer described, thousands of businesses and government agencies relied on Teams to keep working remotely. But most recently, interestingly, the State Department used Teams to help process the Afghan refugees. And the U.S. Immigration Service is processing both Afghan and Latin American refugees who are looking for amnesty. All those requests are going through Microsoft Teams. So, it's been a product that not only is it gratifying to see, the feedback that we've gotten from customers, where they describe it as the savior, they're able to keep the, their organization running, but also we know we've had a material impact on saving lives, and that's really been wonderful. Now, less well known, and again, part of my career advice here is the same leader who built Microsoft Teams also built Microsoft Project, Microsoft Outlook, and Bing. His name is Brian McDonald, and I've been fortunate to work with him on all of those projects over my career. So, in short, I'm going to wrap up my comments, but my advice is use your MBA to look for opportunities to improve lives. And you could rank opportunities by which opportunity is going to help improve more lives and to which you can contribute. Also look for innovative companies, and within those companies, look for innovative leaders with whom to work. So those are my short comments. Justin, back to you to help answer any questions.
All right, thanks a lot, Bill.
I was going to add one thing in too, just in this recurring theme. I think, we look at collaboration. I think historically, I think everybody in the world, and not just Microsoft, and as an individual, looked at collaboration as simply chat, right, and joining meetings. But the reality is the way in which people work is about so much more. And it's not just the screen sharing and looking at people's videos. It's the applications, the automation, the workflow, the organizational DNA and process that's so critical in the enterprise, right? How do I bring that into a single pane of glass in the technology landscape? And I think, I talked a bit at the very beginning about pre-pandemic, this differentiator was the fact that, not only could I offer you a persistent chat experience where I could go back and view history, a reliable meeting client like we're experiencing now, and being able to do that across any device, whether I was in an iPad, an Apple, a PC, an Android device. But it's how do I bring in the workflow and applications that I need to innovate and that I need to innovate collectively into this single pane of glass. I think that's been the real differentiator. And I saw some questions in the chat too, which I won't steal your thunder, Justin, but I think the key points of feedback that we're hearing during, and I certainly won't call this post-pandemic world, has been, how can you continue to extend the things that I can access, the insights that I have the ability to see through this single UI, and make that really easy, right? Streamline my day so that I can go to one place to get to everything, and to be able to innovate. And then also give me the controls to easily be able to disconnect, which, Aamer touched on that, right? Was that fatigue from the start of the pandemic when everybody was really burning the midnight oil. I think the reality is that we never stopped burning the midnight oil. We're in one long meeting. We're really just sitting in front of a device all day. And so while I need you to give me intelligent access to people and content, when I need it, I also need you to give me a way to seamlessly disconnect and discharge and recharge so I can come back and continue to innovate.
Well, and that segues actually into a couple of the questions that people have asked. But one of them is just, okay, going forward, when presumably more people will be back in their office like I am, what are the goals you're working on to sort of further enable this hybrid way of working that we've developed and make sure I don't know that you need to do much to make sure it'll stay going forward, but and this is for all three of you really, but how does this sort of segue into what comes next when the world looks a little more normal? assuming it does at some point.
So let me take a stab on this. You must have just heard this week, probably or late last week, some announcement from us about hybrid work. So there are certain technology things which we need to do and certain behavioral human things which we need to do. One in the technology area is that, how we used to come in the meeting itself, right? So as simple as that, can you make sure that the remote participant and the people in room feel completely, connected and the barriers are gone as much as possible? So for example, the intelligent cameras can identify the people and by their name as they speak, or intelligent speakers, or the front row concept we presented, that you open up a room in a way, arrange the room in a way that the person, when I raise my hand, there's intelligence in the service that it can basically physically raise the hand instead of me taking an action that I'm raising a hand. So the actual natural way I interact with my colleagues, with people, that is captured by technology and presented to people who are not maybe in that particular location or room, sort of that standpoint. That is very key and top of the mind. So it has a combination of investments in new devices, new technology, and also ability to constantly maintain the local regulations from a COVID-19 standpoint. So for example, count the number of participants and let people know that the room is at capacity, for example, right outside the room, sort of a thing. And those are the things. So I'm going to pause there. There's actually was an interesting question, which I think Freada was talking about with the fatigue. If you just allow me a couple of minutes, I will land that what we did actually last year on that. So there was
and there is actually one of our questions is also just asking about digital fatigue, both within your organization and what you sort of experienced in that in terms of feedback from your customers as the months rolled on.
Yeah, so I'll try to summarize a whole bunch of things we shared and some research as well, and the things which we led to and innovation in the technology. One is that the number of meetings actually went small, the duration went smaller, but very frequent, right? As simple as that, having a habit to say that every start of meeting would be on 5 minutes after the hour, so that you're not back to back, you're getting some time, you're standing up, you're doing something sort of thing before you come back. And then we also learned observing, and I want to say that we'll be cognizant of that this may not be a completely flushed out research, but we shared it that, hey, once you look at the grid, and that's the reason probably you have a uniform background, so that your brain is not processing extra information as the background. Everybody has a different background. So as you take it out and you put it in a together mode, that innovative mode we came up, actually the burden of the processing power of the brain has gone drastically reduced. That we saw, and we published that research as well. So we did those sort of things to make it easier to reduce that fatigue and people constantly being online, sort of a thing. Anybody, Freada or Bill, you want to contribute?
Aamer, I was just going to say one other thing too. I think we also worked very hard. We had been working on this pre-pandemic, but it's very much come together as of late in terms of surfacing insights to the individual and to the organization about how people are working, right? So that potentially we can help impact positive behavior change. Like, look, we all have wearables, right? Like if I know how much sleep I got at night and I know how awful it was, and I can see the red on the screen that I'm not up to snuff, right? Will that help me change my behavior? And so we've actually, worked on surfacing telemetry to individuals and to organizations about how they're like, what are their patterns, right? Like, how many times were you multitasking in a meeting? Well, maybe you shouldn't have so many meetings. And maybe can I ask feedback of all participants in a meeting, not just how technically successful it was, right? It's, was the audio quality good, but how impactful was that meeting? And then can I serve that feedback to the meeting organizer so that maybe they can consider new ways of engaging individuals? These are pretty significant shifts in how we're working in a virtual space. I think you couple that with what Aamer was talking about, where we are reimagining physical and virtual landscapes to blur the lines a bit easier so that everybody participating, no matter how they choose to participate, have a first-class experience. It's it is fundamentally changing how the enterprise thinks about innovating. I also think it'll fundamentally change how you attract and retain talent. So, there are those things that we're doing too about surfacing insights to individuals and organizations about how people are working and how you're working to help affect positive behavior change.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
I don't have access to the Q&A panel, or I would have put it in there, but I just have a question because I think we started to talk about this a little bit on the phone when we were setting up the panel, but I never heard the answer. I was wondering, you guys were working on Teams before the COVID pandemic hit, but when the COVID pandemic hit, man, you must have seen, my God, things are going to change really quickly and we have to respond to it. And at the same time, you have this competitor, Zoom, which is suddenly taking a really prominent spot and is being adopted like crazy by all these different organizations and is in the media a lot. Was there a come to God, oh shit moment when you guys had to really rethink how you were going to handle this? And were there times when you thought, oh my God, we've seen now features that we don't have that we have to add? Or was there any time when the rate at which the acceleration of use was overwhelming? I would just love to hear how you guys managed that process.
Yeah, there was a cadence of weekly meetings that became daily meetings in terms of provisioning hardware, because our utilization went up 10x in a very short period of time. So, that was, I don't think there's another organization, even Amazon or Google, that could have responded to that volume of increase in such a short period of time and maintained compliance and security and everything else that we were expected to for our customers. The other thing was, in terms of feature prioritization, we, as Aamer said, really strained the capability of our team, because features that we had thought, oh, those are kind of important, but we'll get to those in a month or two. There was about 35 of those that we had to get done in about a month, 2 months. And that was a huge effort that required a lot of people to work around the clock to get that done. And, fortunately, we were well set up to have engineering centers so that the sun essentially never went down on Teams engineering. We've got a group in Redmond, we've got groups in other places across the United States and North America. We've got a big group in Hyderabad. We've got a big group in Prague. So we're always working on building those features. And the big challenge was that we don't make a lot of money from education customers. So, round numbers, each commercial customer's, dozens of dollars. Each education customer is less than $1. And we, at one point, had some problem when the entire French school system came online at the exact same time, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. And that was, over 5 million people firing up Teams for the first time. And we have the entire school system of probably a dozen or so countries, K through 12, quite a few universities. And we were happy to share the burden with Zoom because they definitely got the short end of the stick in terms of security, Zoom bombing, those kinds of things. So we were well architected for not only the capacity growth, but also this new emphasis on what could go wrong in these meetings when everyone's working virtually. And they also helped us become better. So kudos to them. And we've had a flawless meeting here, so they've got a very good product as well.
Yeah, healthy competition is the oxygen which we breathe, right? So that's I'll leave it there. But to be honest, we was also playing in a slightly different field as well, more enterprise focused as opposed to consumer or personal focus. That also helped. The people who were after us or enterprises, they were already Office 365 customers and used to of those security and compliance aspects which Bill was alluding to. And that's what the team's strength was. And certainly there were obviously overlap. And so that healthy competition from Zoom kept us going.
Yeah. I was also going to add too, Melissa, I think it's a great question. I think the good news is that the feedback that we heard at the start of the pandemic, there was nothing necessarily new, but I think it was eye-opening that, to Bill's point, some of the features that I think people might have said, well, I'd like this in the future, right? We were sort of, the feedback we were receiving was that we could wait for that, it'd be great, but it wasn't critical, shifted a bit. But I don't think there was any oh man, we never even thought of that moments at all, which I, from a product development standpoint, I think is exactly the place you want to be, where you have good pulse on what, what your customer base is potentially looking for. And then, to Bill's point, really just shifting into, overdrive to work to identify those core sets of features and functionality that we need to reprioritize at the top and execute right as fast as we can at a global scale.
Thank you so much. Such a great story. Really amazing. I'll disappear now again.
Okay. Well, but Melissa, please join us again if you got more questions, and any of you out there who have more questions, please throw them in there. I guess one thing that I was just thinking about, especially when you were talking, Aamer, about how the meetings changed. What were other shifts just in how you all work together, other than the obvious one that you were doing it in a more distributed fashion over are there any other things that sort of pop out over the past 18 months that, that's a cool innovation that we might not have come up with otherwise?
So think in this term, myself and Bill shared the same floor in Lincoln Square in Bellevue, right? Every time, or the person we both worked for was actually on the same floor, obviously. Every time we had something which could be a quick hurdle, I didn't have to schedule a meeting. I didn't have to go and look up Bill's calendar or Srini's calendar and say, I need to talk to them. I just popped in and said, hey, Bill, I need your help here. Or what do you think of this? That was gone. Second thing was that if I saw, let's say, Freada and Bill talking in a hallway, and we three were working on a same project, and I'm get up and see that they are talking, and I'm walking towards them, and I want to say that I'm part of it. And I figure out that they're talking something else, some other project, and they know that I'm listening. And I just keep walking and keep getting to my water cooler or coffee or whatever I was going to get. Emulating that in digital space was really cool. So that's what the threaded conversation or channel meetings allowed us and created the differentiation which we could offer than a competition, where we could hop in and hop off sort of a thing, or mesh up, sort of thing, very quickly understand what's going on and say, I want to contribute or I don't want to contribute. So creating those experiences in digital space, which you had in the physical space, were really key moments. Can you do 100%? No. Is there a room for continuous improvement and innovation? Absolutely. That's what it is.
Well, I was going to say one last thing, Justin, and that is that the remote sports and other events has been a major change. So, we had scaled up to meetings of 20,000 people in size. Microsoft has had several conferences with over 100,000 participants. That's all been on Teams. And we came up with innovations so that we could, have the, when the swimmer won the gold medal in Tokyo, his wife and he were able to, see each other remotely. She was back in the United States because she couldn't be there in person. The screen in NBA games where you can see various family members and fans from the playing floor. That's something that we would not have thought of before the COVID lockdown. So those have been new innovations and changes. And what's interesting is sort of, I think in terms of our next big challenge, I had a business school reunion that was scheduled to be last fall and didn't happen. But what was great was that the virtual version brought out people who hadn't attended any of our reunions for years. So we have reunions every 5 years. There's the regular social people. It was interesting as a lot of them didn't participate that actively virtually. It's almost as if they're creatures only of the physical world. But then there were people who maybe they're quieter folks, or could be a variety of reasons why they did not attend the in-person reunions, but they showed up in a big way virtually, sharing pictures, videos, things that were really charming and hadn't been shared at previous reunions. And I want to bring that virtual creature and physical creature together so that they can build a community effectively at upcoming events and conferences. And how we do that, I think, is going to be a really interesting thing. But it's not just hybrid meetings where there's a bit of formality and there's a bit of flexibility. True social interaction is so critical. And I think we found that there are people who prefer the virtual experience. Right. And we all benefit from creating a way that we can marry those preferences and experiences together. And that'll be an interesting challenge.
Well, because one thing, just looking in the statistics from Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's like the tech industry clearly has a higher proportion of those people than others because it's staying much more remote than a lot of other industries. And I'm sort of curious and I would think the public sector in a lot of places would have struggled with this whole shift because like here in New York, they've just ordered all the city workers to go back to their offices, no flexibility at all. Are you guys seeing that kind of industry by industry difference in who's adopting this and who's not?
Yes, though I think a lot of it is at the level of which device is the most familiar and comfortable. So there's a whole set of workers who, mobile devices are really their primary information tool. And Teams is very well suited for them, but there's still work we need to do to integrate all of the line of business and other communications that they have with their organization to be part of that device in a secure, manageable way, scalable way. That's great for the employee, it's great for the organization. It's true that people who are familiar with PCs and laptops, and that's the primary way they get their work done, that's been the easiest transition. But there's a lot of ways that the government at the federal, state, and local levels, in some ways, has been as fast, if not faster, than commercial organizations, but it's been in specific areas. So, for example, the bomb detection squad in Florida for the last football championships, they were well in advance of any other organization I've seen in how they used it. The Belgian police using drone technology was way ahead of anyone else. I was thinking of the Super Bowl, by the way. So the Super Bowl bomb detection folks, they very innovative on how they use Teams and how they use technology in general. So it's been specific. In general, any organization where there's if I was going to be really blunt about it, money and guns used the technology extremely well. Other parts of organizations, it varied quite a bit. But when you get to sort of the frontline workers, whether it's baristas or people working in warehouses to pull for deliveries, when drive-up deliveries, curbside deliveries, that they had great use of our technology. And it was really interesting to see how it varied. In New York, we had a great situation with Project Cupid, which some of you might have heard about. Initially, it was just to line up a justice of the peace to allow for a wedding, an in-person wedding, but to line up a justice of the peace who would manage that. Then it became virtual justice of the peace with just the the couple and the necessary witnesses. Finally, to the point where Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Zoom, got married using Microsoft Teams, and all of his guests and family and friends were all on Teams to have the wedding. So now we've gotten to the point where there's complete virtual weddings. That was the first application from COVID in the state of New York, and it was, of all things, the wedding department, marriage department.
And I'll add to digital justice, not in North America, but in Latin America as well, and around the world. Then one piece which really amazed me, one vertical, there's whole, but one which really amazed me was healthcare. They were very fast to adopt it, and especially in the pharma. So without taking names, a lot of us got shots. And I'm very proud to say that Microsoft team and the background played a huge role worldwide in the development of the vaccine. Big role.
I was going to say, Justin, I'll just kind of close out and come back to the original question in terms of like industries and moving back to the physical workspace. I think it's definitely industries dependent and geography dependent per se, and even particular roles within a given vertical. I think though that what we're hearing overwhelmingly is that even in the most rigid of circumstances where we have to come back to a physical workspace, we still need to provide flexibility, right? And almost like democratize the choices that you have in terms of the technology, how you'll use the technology that you're using to innovate and collaborate and communicate. And I, from in the enterprise and maybe outside of healthcare and retail, where I think they've had, there's some limitations that force you to come back into the physical workspace altogether or to have remained there. I think most of the folks that we're working with cross industries are thinking of how do I provide how do I build in some level of flexibility and choice to my users? I think they also recognize it's going to be a competitive advantage to attract and retain talent. When you're like that benefit when you're getting hired, right? Instead, it's great healthcare and flexibility about like traveling to a physical office space.
I want to say thank you so much to our team here that came and presented. I was so excited to find you guys and to be connected to you and hear the stories that you had to share. I think we all learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you. And now I'm going to hand it over to Natalia, who's going to introduce our next keynote speaker.